This session is really a reflection of what the school is about. Being the #1 school in Africa, I think it's important that we play a leadership role in a time such as this. I think the situation that each one of us find ourselves in requires that we really take a leadership role and take the bull by the horn and try and find solutions to the problems that none of us actually had even considered or thought about how to resolve. So we really appreciate you having taken the time to join us in this particular session. I also want to thank the panelists who come from different parts of the world, and we're very excited that we've got a wealth of global experience as well as a very rich local experience. I will start with my comrades from locally here, with Sis Lindiwe Sangwenisido, who actually we work very closely with in the tourism sector, a leader of great significance from the domestic tourism side, working with the City Lodge Hotel Group. And thank you, Sis Lindiwe. Utsisa might be known to some of you who are South Africans. As the head of South African tourism, he's been at the forefront of really taking a lead since the advent of this COVID-19 situation. Tracy Daniel is one of our colleagues at the School of Tourism, and apparently she comes with a very strong events management experience, but currently does integrated work learning within the school. And for those of you who may wonder what that is, it sounds like she finds the right job for the right people in the school. So she's a very important person. For those of alumni and students who are looking at this, she's your plug, if I can use the word plug. Professor Tom Baum comes out of Scotland and really comes with a lot of experience on the human capital side, and we thank you, Prof, for taking the time. Last but not least is Anita Mendirata, who is my boss because she is one of our directors at Chamber Tourism. And Anita really comes with a wealth of experience as a consultant, as well as an advisor to the United Nations World Tourism Organization. So colleagues, welcome to you all. And I'm looking forward to this session. And it's important to say right at the beginning that this is one of many. And we will be having other sessions of a similar nature and hopefully be able to develop dialogues and conversations that we can really take forward in terms of really assisting us to make sense of this pandemic and to take a leading role as the school, but not only ourselves, but obviously in partnership with other South African institutions going forward. I'm sure some of you are really wondering why this particular session, why this time, but all of us are currently hypothesizing of the outcomes of a whole lot of issues in terms of employment. We all know that the tourism sector, at least in South Africa, has been really hard hit. And it gets hard hit at a time when we've been trying to also raise the profile of a time when we've been aggressively trying to push. I mean, when you look at the unemployment rate in the country, within the youth, sitting at 43.2%, they are one of the hardest hit groups within the South African system. And I think it becomes important for us to take away this significant impact of joblessness within this particular group. I'm hoping that the session today will really begin to start looking at what is happening in the tourism sector, what is happening globally, what is happening in the country, and how we can begin to position ourselves as an institution to address these problems, and how we can begin to give hope to the youth in this country. I think it's important that the young people see this sector as a tool, as an instrument, as a means that can really move them out of the abject poverty that they find themselves in. Without any further ado, I think I'd like to spend most of the time listening to the panelists. I'm going to request my good friend Anita to really give us a bit of a global perspective, and then we'll kind of start playing around with the local and then move on to other areas. Anita, welcome. Over to you.
Jerry, thank you so much. I'm going to do a quick screen share and a little prayer to the technology gods that this works. And we are set. Excellent. Jerry, thank you very much. I'm honored to be here. I thank enormously the University of Johannesburg and the School of Hospitality and Tourism. Very touched to be part of this. I also send the special regards from my Secretary General, Zera Pololikashvili, who knows that I'm on air with one of our Dutch-loved member states, South Africa itself. And I have to say that, Jerry, you know me as my South African brother, as much as I have a Canadian accent and passport. Much of my heart is in South Africa, it having been my home for over 20 years, and you being someone I met on my second day in the country a lifetime ago. I'm going to take you very quickly through a world perspective of where we are in terms of COVID-19, because this really has been quite a shocking situation for us all. So zipping through this. As I've said before, this has been a shocking situation globally. It is the first time our world has experienced across the world an invisible crisis, one that is agnostic to geography, to religion, to borders, to societies. And importantly, we don't yet understand the virus and we don't yet have a vaccine. And even today's announcement about the fact that there are some early signs of a vaccine being found, the testing is only going into its second phase, and at best, we're looking at early next year to be able to roll out the vaccine. So we're still in a really dubious situation. What does that mean for us in tourism? This is the picture. There are 100% travel restrictions on around the world, different levels, cautious restart of the Northern Hemisphere summertime. I say cautious as we need to make sure that while Mother Nature caught us out in the first wave of the pandemic, the last thing we want is that the challenge between lives and livelihoods puts us into a second wave and a third wave because people simply are not used to how to handle, again, an invisible challenge. In 2020, we're anticipating at a best case scenario, 60% decline in terms of international arrivals, worst case 80%. So much of this is going to depend on how we manage the transition from the first wave into either a sense of mobilizing our societies again cautiously and carefully, or we find ourselves, like is happening in Asia and the Middle East, some signs of a second wave, which is very unnerving. At this point in time, we're losing 1 million jobs a day in travel and tourism. This is the worst crisis our world has faced with 9/11, the global financial crisis, and SARS combined. We are all a living case study, and we will all be in the history books one day. Please God, we get to the history books having been able to come together through this, because with COVID-19, we either all win or we all lose. It's as simple as that. The world is on watch, as I said, for spikes and surges, second wave and third wave. A vaccine, as I indicated now, is in the early stages of hope. And we're looking at that again in 2021, but still, the WHO and CDC are warning that could only give us 70 to 75% immunity. We need to continue with managing, as I said earlier, lives versus livelihoods. And we know where South Africa is in terms of level 3, but there's been lack of clarity on that. I'm going to hand that over ultimately to CISA to deal with. I'm going to deal with the international. What is the opportunity and why is this conversation so important? Simply this. As happens with crisis with our industry, it x-rays the fact that ultimately our strength is our ecosystem. And this is what the opportunity is for especially higher education. The greatest complaint that our industry has globally is that it's not appreciated as an essential industry. Reason being, we don't put it into the economic modeling the way we should be. And that's the opportunity from an education point of view, is embedding. The value of tourism is employments and value chains. It's all about the fact that it triggers all of these value chains off simply by mobilizing one sector, which, as you can see with all of these, are essential, whether it's construction, agriculture, food, transportation, events. Ultimately, everything comes down to travel and tourism being the ecosystem that sets all of these industry into motion. I just want to give you some updates in terms of a study that was done in May, 17,000 people around the world questioning what is the confidence level in terms of how long it will take for your country, the country being studied, to actually get through COVID-19 to a point of ultimately when are we going to see some stability. What's frightening about this, and I've indicated here South Africa, we clearly have a sense of high confidence that it's going to take us up to a year. Even around the world, extremely high confidence levels around the fact that this is going to be for the long term because of the lack of understanding of the virus, how it actually operates, and how we can then get out of a second wave and get into recovery rather than getting triggered into a second and a third wave. What this results then in is looking at, great, where do people then want to have a vacation? Because what we found with our industry now, as is always the case, people rely on travel and tourism, not just from the point of view of the economy, but the mental health value. But people ultimately, and this is a global result, looking at it from the point of view of they want to stay home locally. It is so important that domestic tourism is supported by governments for three primary reasons. A, we understand protocols of our home country more than anywhere else in the world. B, it's a way of making sure that people mobilize the supply chains and the value chains around them first to get the economies moving. And third, importantly, it's allowing people's psychological comfort zone to be able to expand closer to home, working around the country as a whole before they go next door into new places that might get them into dangerous situations when it comes to quarantine, protocols, whatever the case may be. So ultimately, people are wanting to stay home. What's also very important about this is, as I said, why do we need to reopen cautiously our industry? Because it's about reopening supply chains, goods and services, mobility, and logistics. That ultimately helps build job and SMME protection, which exactly as you said, Jerry, if we've got 33.2% youth still in a position of dealing with job crisis because of this before COVID-19, all of this is going to be escalated during and after. So we really need to start opening up to get people out and working again and supporting one another simply by mobilizing the economy. We need to make sure that we have integrated health and safety protocols. And this is something I focus on enormously. Governments have protocols, hotels, airlines, transport systems have protocols, but there's one critical link. Travelers must respect those protocols. Otherwise, all of the scientific theory falls away. So this is about individuals taking responsibility in addition to industry, which is a global plea that we are making around the world. As I said, we've had the world locked down for 100 and 150 days. There's going to be a comfort zone expansion that's required. And it's really about looking at not the new normal. There is no new normal, it's a next normal. The next normal is now as we cautiously reopen. The next normal after that will be based on when a vaccine is determined and rolled out. Then there's a next normal. So it's always looking at it in patches of how is the world moving forward. But what does this mean for higher education? And the biggest thing that I've found during this crisis is that language has changed. The definition of sustainability has changed. It's no longer about green. It's economic sustainability, societal, cultural, and spiritual sustainability, keeping people's mental health buoyant, and ultimately saying it's not just about now, it's for the long term, which means the word of branding has changed. It's no longer just about identities, logos, and payoff lines. A brand is an expression like a human being of trust, responsibility, accountability, and sustainability, not just identity. And recognizing that now is not the time for campaigning, now's the time for communicating. So whether it's a destination, a hotel, an airline, it's about talking to the world, engaging with the world, not just going out and campaigning to the world. Because ultimately, people need to escape through looking at destination communication, dreaming about where next, and therefore building a relationship that's going to be able to continue. And ultimately that pushes us down to measuring performance. Performance is critical in terms of visibility, transparency, profitability, and community. It's about substance and style. And at the risk of making him blush, this is where I'm going to give Huge credit to CISA, who has been tireless since the beginning, and globally, as much as I am biased towards him, one of the most visible, courageous, transparent, and honest leaders I've come across in the global community. You've been online the whole time, CISA. I think many of us have you now as our screensaver, but we thank you for that because you've been exemplary, because you demonstrated not just what South Africa is a destination, but the spirit of South Africans. And right now that is critical because we are all living the great hypothesis. And as I said, we either all come through it or we all end up losing. And that's really vital. I will leave, Jerry, this presentation with you, so anyone needing to go back on notes. But before I do, I say a sincere thank you because we still have a lot of unknowns. Trust is our new currency about managing the pandemic, the policies around it, the protocols, and the personal connections. That is why today matters. Mother Nature grounded us all. She sent us back to our rooms for 150 days. Now is the time to reinvent the future because there is no going back to tourism of the past. If we waste this time and we don't shape the future of tourism, especially through higher education, we've missed one of the greatest opportunities of our lives. So with that, again, I say thank you very much and I hand you back the stage, Mr. Washington.
Thanks, Anita, and thank you very much for a very kind of snapshot of what the global picture looks like. I'm going to put CISA on the spot, since you're a screensaver, CISA, to many of us now. And I think you've done these presentations so many times. I think perhaps if you could give us a bit of a South African flavor to what Anita just spoke about, but with a very strong skew towards maybe what higher education could be or should be looking at in order to drive the resurgence of tourism. Over to you, my brother.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everybody. Wow, how do I follow that presentation, that tee-up? That's unfair, Anita. But thank you for setting the context. And I think the key thing to take from there, that this is a global phenomenon. And just to kind of gives you a context, what does this mean then to South Africa in itself? So if you look at 2019 figures, 1.5 billion international trips happened around the world. And if you take that into context, what is our market share as Africa? And I'd like to start with Africa because some people in the world still sees Africa as a country. So let's use it to our benefit then, right? So you've got 54 countries on the continent and the market share that we have is about 5% of global market share. So it can show you that we've got quite a high opportunity to actually raise our bar from that perspective. Comparatively, to give a bit of a sense, that market share is about the same as the Middle East, as an example. So I think we've got a long way to go. What you've seen around African countries, a lot of them have made the decision to actually diversify their economies. We've been very strong around mineral resources, whether it's gold, diamonds, oil, extractive stuff. And all of us are starting to realize that stuff is running out of the ground and we're looking for more of the services space. Hence the shift to many around tourism as an example. South Africa has tourism planted right in the middle of its economic strategy, the National Development Plan. And one of the key pillars around there is around tourism in itself. So what does this then mean to South Africa? So in the Africa space, we like to compete, obviously. We are the third largest in terms of arrivals into South Africa. First tied, actually, it's Egypt and Morocco, right? So they sit with about 13 million arrivals every single year. South Africa has 10.2 million, right? So 10.2 million arrivals into South Africa in 2019. Now, where do these arrivals come from? And I'm saying these become important because when we start to think about the current pandemic we're in and how we're going to restore things, hopefully not to where it was, but in the new kind of space, we have to look in terms of where then are we going to get this economic activity. Now, 74% of our arrivals come from the continent itself, continent of Africa. This makes sense, proximity, land borders, et cetera, gives you that. However, the big thing to notice and to keep to mind that the reason why we are focusing on tourism is that we want to show up our GDP. Now, conceptually imagine that you are getting people from outside of the country to come spend money in the country. That helps you show up your GDP, fresh new money being injected. That's the ultimate aim. Yes, we look at arrivals, but it's easy to measure, but what we really want is people coming in to spend money into our economy and thus boosting it up, right? So 74% of arrivals come from the continent. However, only 40% of the spend comes from that 74%. It gives you a sense that we've got a lot of arrivals, but they don't spend as much as higher places. Now, look at the contrast, what we have. If you look at Europe, Europe comprises something like 16% of arrivals. However, the spend is 40% of the spend they have here. So you've got Europe and Africa, right? 16%, 74%, but their spend is the same and comparable. So when we look at in terms of where should we invest as a country in terms of people coming in, you've got to balance the volume and value play essentially from the perspective. Okay, now let's come in a bit close into South Africa. 1 in 23 jobs is generated by the tourism sector in itself. 3% of our GDP is a direct contribution of tourism. But if you look at the indirect contribution, it's about 8 to 9%. And we say indirect because there are so many other sectors that are induced by tourism that are not counted directly. Let me give an example, and I like to make this example quite a lot, is that if you walk into, I haven't been there for some time enough, for Sandton City, the shopping center, right? There's a passage there called the Golden Mile, super expensive shops. If you stand there and you close your eyes open your ears, you'll hear that the languages being spoken are not South African. Essentially what that means, these are people coming outside the country who come there and spend money at that shopping center, at all those shops. But here's a problem, is that all of the spend that they do gets counted as retail in terms of GDP calculation, not as tourism. So that makes me kind of scream and say, hey, that should be attributed to us, right? So our tourists arrive in the country, they exchange forex, they bring dollars, euros, and pounds, exchange that to local currency. The banks get excited. But I like to say, show me a sector and I'll show you how tourism contributes to it, right? And the construction for the hotels, but even in the hotels, you eat food. Now, when Sun City tells me that over a weekend, they actually cracked 85,000 eggs, right? Just to cater for the people there. It immediately gives you a picture of that stimulus that all those people who went to Sun City has on agriculture. And I could go on for days, essentially. Now, where do we find ourselves? From the 26th of March, when we went into hard lockdown level 5, tourism was not identified as an essential sector. And then rightfully so, because the virus needs people to move, right? Mobility, and it needs socialization, people to interact for it to spread. Guess what? Our job is to get people to move and people to hug each other every single day, which goes against, curbing down the pandemic itself. And we've moved quite a bit since then. We're now in lock level 3, right? And certain protocols, I think as Anita had talked about, have been introduced. These protocols, serve to de-risk the sector. They serve to say, well, we want to open up as an economy and contribute. However, we've put in certain measures that actually curb the spread of the virus. And as I speak, I hope to all of you are thinking opportunity there, because essentially we've got to reimagine what the hospitality and tourism space looks like. Now, I want you to think about when you're about to check into a hotel, you are able to find what you're looking for online on your phone. You'll be able to check in online. When you walk into the reception, there won't be a desk, right? Essentially, because you're trying to remove as many people from the system as possible. That social distancing you hear all the time. You'll be able to go to your door and tap your phone or enter a code to open. You'll be able to itemize whether you want your bed to be changed every single day, the linen to be changed every single day, or it's fine, you'll do it yourself. And it all goes about mass itemization. How do I get what I'm looking for and my comfort levels around it? Now, you've got to think as well, this essentially then has pressures on the employment because you're removing a lot of menial, unskilled jobs from the process because you're trying to introduce an element of social distancing itself. But technology is going to play a big role right across the board. everyone wants to be spoken to as if they are the only person in the room, but in a very mass-based environment. How do we land that? You know, I used to work in a bank in my previous life, and in the previous days used to get, dear account holder, when you got the statement. Right? Oh,
I think just want to make sure that we give the other panelists a little bit of time. I know that you're very enthusiastic and you can go to town on these things. You
I'll
just
keep quiet.
bring it back, bring it back.
No problem. I think just to wrap it up then is I suppose one of the key messages that I want to land is about thinking about the future. We are forced to press the recalibration button. We are all forced to press the reset button. And I firmly believe that disruptors are the people that are coming outside of the sector that are going to make the changes that are going to come through, not us inside. And we have to be open for this new change, but we all have to be obsessed, by the way, about serving the customer's needs. What is in the mind of the visitor that is changing their mind every single day because new data points are coming in all the time. I think it's going to be that tightrope that we're going to walk through towards getting to that. And I'll leave it at that for now, Jerry, and I'll pick up any questions later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cesar. I think you give a nice impression of creating a view that says that things are not going to be the same, they're going to change. But I think it's important for those who are watching that as those things change and those jobs move, for instance, you don't have a receptionist who's going to be signing you in or somebody who's going to be changing your linen at that point in time. You still need somebody who'll do those things very quickly and be able to provide a just-in-time service. So I'm just wanting to encourage all of us not to think of this as doom and gloom, that jobs are moving out of the system. They move out of one system into another system. So the question really becomes, what is that system? We'll always need eggs, probably more eggs. So maybe then we need to start thinking about the value chain kind of conversation going forward. I'm going to invite Prof. Tom Bone. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing your surname correctly. He's our international friend from the University of Strathclyde. I think I'm hoping I'm saying it properly there. And he's a capital expert. Prof, do you want to give us a bit of a higher education perspective on this discussion? I think you may want to unmute them.
Yes, I certainly do. And I'll just share my screen with you if I may. And I will then share a few thoughts about the area of education, focusing more specifically on this theme. I'm delighted to be part of this panel as a way of further developing my close links to the School of Tourism and Hospitality at UJ, where I'm a visiting professor, and I'm quite humbled to be part of this first panel. So thank you very much to the organizers. I speak very much as an outsider, of course, to South African tourism, to South African tourism education, although I'm an avid consumer of your tourism products. But I hope what I say has some relevance, because I speak on the basis of some 38 years of working in tourism education and training. Anita started by, or concluded by referring to a quote from the Director General of the UNWTO, talking about trust. And my theme is really around trust. It's around trust of employees and students in their future. And I think that's one of the real challenges that we have collectively. I believe that trust has been dented, that confidence has been hugely dented, and we have some very, very bruised young people worldwide who had anticipated an exciting career in our industry and perhaps look on the future rather less optimistically than they did. There's been a lot of international focus on rebuilding consumer confidence in our industry, and that's very important. But I would argue that equally important is overcoming the challenge of low employee and student confidence post-pandemic. I think in a way that perhaps hasn't been really recognized, this confidence has been undermined by the rapid retrenchment of staff and students with the onset of COVID-19. Our industry was perhaps the one that closed down most completely during national lockdowns and left a lot of people physically, but also metaphorically stranded in terms of their careers, in terms of their aspirations. And certainly in the Northern Hemisphere, the timing as we were coming towards graduations in our summer couldn't have been worse in many respects. So we saw the cancellation of student internships and graduate job offers on a very large scale. We've seen restructuring and job losses in major international companies. Some cynics would say those were that the pandemic has been used as a cover for planned change in these companies. I think there's also been uncertainty about what educational delivery in the future will look like. Many of us in the university sector and the college sector are struggling to find viable alternatives, particularly in our sector where so much is around the hands-on, the practical. And to simulate that remotely is going to be a challenge which perhaps we shouldn't face head on, but look for alternatives. So I think this is a shared stakeholder challenge. It's not just a matter for the universities, for the colleges. I think it's in our collective interests to address this confidence issue head on. To work, it's important that tourism and hospitality employers and associations are directly involved in the process of restoring confidence. Public agencies have a major role in this, whether they're in the skills and labour market area or whether indeed they are located in tourism. Obviously the providers, the colleges and university, but we must also reach down into the high school systems to give confidence to the student advisors, the influencers who have got to say on our behalf, yes, hospitality and tourism does have a future. It is a worthwhile industry to get involved in, and not put our potential talent off at that stage. And then there are wider community and family stakeholders, again, who are going to need reassuring, but are also part of the reassurance process. So how can we respond in a way that is imaginative and sustainable? And I think this is, for me, the critical thing. And this is where the collaboration, this is where the working together comes to the fore. I think there's a need for long-term investment especially in young entrants to the industry, whether that investment is financial, whether it's through commitment, whether it's through opportunity. We all know that many of the jobs in our industry worldwide are highly precarious. Our workers are frequently, and not just in response to the pandemic, seen as disposable assets. As the demand cycle goes up and down, employees are thrown out and invited back in a way that perhaps we need to revisit. Maybe employers need to start taking a longer term, a more sustainable approach to their employment policies in order to build back that confidence. Because if you shed all your employees at the end of a seasonal period, for example, that may be inevitable, but if it's not, if you do that, if you shed, do you really expect people to come back to you? Maybe not. I'd like to float the idea of guaranteed internships, something which is common in other professions, for example, the medical profession, where trainee doctors get two years guaranteed employment, certainly in this country, on the completion of their education. Why don't we look at some form of guaranteed first job positions for our graduates? Yes, it's going to cost money, and that there can be various debates and different models as to how and who pays for that. But I think if we say to young people, yes, at the end of this your education, when you graduate, you will be guaranteed a post in a recognized business, I think that will make a big difference. I think there needs to be radical changes to curriculum and teaching delivery. And that's not just about going online. It's about reconceptualizing what we want to do with tourism education. I think the shock that students have gone through, and all of us have in many respects, means that, if you like, the constant the very sort of high profile, high sell industry that we've described, which we've presented to our students, perhaps needs to be evaluated more critically. Perhaps we need to create more, if you like, thinking, reflective and critical graduates who will be more challenging for employers to work with, but ultimately will be more rewarding to work with as well. So I think those of us in the university sector have a lot of work to do to reconceptualize what we do in the classroom or indeed online. And I think finally, we need to listen to young people. We, as an industry, certainly, we've been very good at telling young people what we expect of them. We haven't necessarily been very good at listening to what they want from their lives. What do you want from your tourism and hospitality career? Not what we can offer you, but what do you want? And with that, with those thoughts, which don't come with very prescriptive answers, I will leave you. Thank you very much.
I think you have done a great job of setting Tracy up in terms of just some comments. I mean, you mentioned the fact that there's a need for a partnership that will invest in students into their future. I think what would be of interest would be to hear what Tracy's views are in terms of what the student should look like, what the curriculum should look like. So that I think there's got to be some sort of a match somewhere along the way. Maybe Tracy, without putting you too much on the spot, do you want to just give us some comments on that?
Yeah, hi Jerry, thank you. As you mentioned, I'm the Work Integrated Learning Coordinator in the School of Tourism and Hospitality. That doesn't mean I can give everyone jobs. It means that I place students for the Work Integrated Learning part of the learning program, which means that they are placed in industry where they are given the opportunity to apply the classroom knowledge, and it essentially bridges the gap between the theory and the practice. Obviously, this year with the arrival of the COVID-19 pandemic, it was virtually impossible for us to place students in face-to-face internship positions, particularly because of the state of the tourism and hospitality industries. So as the SDH, we had to really think quickly and on our feet about how we could relook at the work integrated learning module to ensure that our students would still graduate. So we liaised with our industry partners, and for this year, we've come up with a remote internship program. So essentially, we put out a call across the industry in South Africa and abroad, asking for industry members to put their hands up and step forward as mentors for our students. We then put together what is a mentor handbook, which really details what the work integrated learning program looks like, what is required of the mentor, what is required of the student, what the role of UJ is during this whole process, and allowed people to step forward and say, listen, I've got this experience in the industry, I'm interested in these projects, and I'm willing to take on 1, 2, or 5 students as mentors and really actively work with them over the next 6 months, giving them projects and tasks to complete, meeting with them regularly to give them feedback on their performance, just to chat with them and support them. And we've really found this has been such a wonderful opportunity for the student because it gives them the chance to engage with industry members in terms of having real life work situations to work on, but also, as Prof. Baum mentioned, because they're feeling so despondent at the moment, just to engage with somebody who's in industry who can assure them that the industry does still exist. At the end of this program, they will put together a portfolio of evidence, which will detail all of the work that they have covered and will ensure that they have covered the required number of hours to complete the work integrated module. And that is what we will use to assess them on work integrated learning for this year. It's been an interesting process. It's been tricky to sometimes ask people to be a mentor at a time when they are just trying to keep their business afloat. But we've had incredible buy-in from wonderful organizations such as South African Tourism and Soko Sun. And it also has provided our industry partners with incredible opportunities to groom future employees, also as part of their corporate social responsibility. And so it's been a wonderful interactive activity between the university and our industry partners. Really what's come out of COVID-19 for us is that we, as higher education institutions, need to produce a more resilient graduate. And I know that industry really wants us to provide a work-ready graduate, but for us, it's also important to produce graduates that are not only good workers, but also confident entrepreneurs. And these students need to be very responsive to change. They need to be able to make actual meaningful contributions to the industry, particularly considering, what the industry is currently going through. And I think that through COVID, a lot of this resilience has been learnt. The students have shown to be extremely determined. They've shown endurance and adaptability and real sort of the ability to really recuperate after a massive crisis. But none of this is possible without collaboration between the university and our industry partners. We need them to take on our students. And we also use their feedback as part of redesigning the curriculum in the face of the changing industry. We've also seen that in terms of our graduates and what the industry is asking for and what COVID has presented, that there's a real shift in focus from the attitude of the student to the aptitude of the student. The student needs to have competencies to do the kind of work that is required. They need to be able to develop the skills to be able to complete their tasks. And this is not just physical, but it's also mental, it's also psychological. And fortunately, we find that this is easier to train than attitude. We can train the students to have these core competencies. So really, how can we as academics and industry, how can we do this again? And how can we do this together? And the key is that we really need commitment from both parties. The work integrated learning module and this internship period, it now looks quite different. Students are no longer the interns that you can give menial tasks to make coffee and to go to the photocopy machine. They now expect a really substantial and meaningful experience that is very much career related. Before the students were paired with their mentors, we spoke with them and we said, reflecting on your experience and looking at yourself and your competencies, where do you see yourself going in the industry? Do you see it in, travel operations and events management? And we've paired them with mentors who are specialists in those particular fields. The students also want to actively participate in the learning experience, and they want to see how it is relevant to their academic studies. And so industry is now more obliged to provide more appropriate training experience and not see work integrated learning as just easy access to labor or just sort of free staffing and commitment free staffing. And if used properly.
Can I also ask you to start winding it down, because I want Sis Lindy to.
Yes, so just in terms of what the future might look like for us, we will definitely going forward keep aspects of this new model of work integrated learning. There's definitely been benefits of taking it online. The process is more streamlined. And as Prof. Baum has mentioned, it means re-looking at the curriculum. There's this constant thinking amongst the students that, oh my goodness, post-COVID, technology will replace humans and there will not be any jobs. We'd rather like to see it as that technology will connect rather than replace. This does involve, significant changes to our curriculum, perhaps incorporating new and exciting things such as AI and robotics and chatbots. It also means that perhaps us as academics and industry members, that we need to look at our skill set. And, we can also collaborate on things like short learning programs and these new aspects of the industry. But the bottom line is that our students have a major role to play in the sustainability of the industry going forward and the relaunch of this sort of new look industry. Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you, Tracy. I think you've set it up very nicely for me to assist Lindy to come in. The issue of the student of the future, the curriculum of the future. Then now we want to talk about the employer of the future. Think what are they looking for and what would they be willing to provide and what is actually available for the students who are coming out of these institutions. I'm liking how the conversation has kind of taken a particular thread as it moves. Sis Lindy, I'm going to hand over to you to talk a little bit about some of the challenges and the opportunities that you see. I think you are speaking to yourself, Sis Lindy, which is not a good thing.
No, it's not a good thing. It's a sign of age. But thank you very much. A tough act to follow, given that everybody who spoke before me has touched on a lot of aspects that I was planning to touch on. I hope when I share my screen, I can do so without any glitches. I was told to keep it on my screen, but it's not there. So let me do this. I'm going to do what Sisa did, and I'm going to ad-lib and talk as I.
I think, Sis Lindy, you've pressed your mute button again.
So not the most technological astute. I think when we talk about the employer of tomorrow, in the wake and in light of COVID, it is important to touch on all the aspects that the previous speakers did talk about. I like to have context, and I like to sort of lay the scenario. You know, if students are looking at where they fit in, the most important thing, I think, or learners as we call them now, is to first of all get a very strong understanding for what happened. We all had a rude awakening. We all didn't understand what was happening or even get it on the first day when we heard of patient zero in South Africa, coming back from Italy and landing in Pietermaritzburg as the first patient. It seemed so far. And today we are way over the mark of, in terms of the number of cases, at about, I believe, over 300 and some cases. I've even lost track. The point is, as a learner, as an employee, as an employer, it's important for us to always understand the big picture. Caesar talked about the economic value of tourism in South Africa. And I think that is an important place to start from as all of us look at where do we sit in the economy. Previous to COVID, we were enjoying the position of 8.6, you know, contributing 8.6% to the total GDP. We knew that in terms of Forex, our export industry, that was in the region of 120 billion. We knew the number of jobs that our industry created. And this is where, of course, employers and employees become an important aspect. 1.5 million jobs and growing in terms of whatever the needs were. We also had budding and established SMEs, over 49,000 of those, all part of this whole value chain. If we looked at casinos and restaurants in terms of their contribution, we're talking about casinos contributing up to 18.9 billion, restaurants up to 33.8 billion. Caesar talked about the indirect impact. He talked about all the examples, be it manufacturing, you know, the fuel services, construction, agriculture. There are so many ways we can demonstrate how tourism plays a direct, some people will say indirect role on all the other side industries. The impact of COVID has obviously led us to restrictions, which everyone has spoken about. We're currently sitting at level 3. And the reality is that many people have lost jobs. The reality is that most of the learners who we as the employer would have had on our books were the first to feel the real pain. If you're an employer, your first focus is obviously at home, and you look at all your permanent staff. And as a result, sadly, we saw a lot of part-timers, casual staff, and a lot of our learners being the first to bear the brunt of waking up and learning that learnership had been stopped abruptly, or a job or a position or a role in a hotel or a restaurant or in any of the tourism and hospitality sector aspects had been brought to a rude halt. Now in level 3, where government is trying very hard to give us an opportunity to crank it up, as I say, we slowly see the economy awakening, and different aspects of the economy have been woken up. When it comes to tourism and hospitality, we know that the restaurants have some sort of limited participation. We know that hotels, accommodation, for example, are only currently taking care of domestic travel, and even they're very specifically business and essential service travelers. I can talk quite openly and say huge hotel groups like ourselves are easily trading in single-digit numbers when we come to occupancy levels. And that just puts it into perspective. Businesses that were maybe running at nearly 70% are easily sitting at 5-6% occupancy. Restaurants will tell the same story, and that has resulted in many of these businesses being mothballed and being closed down. So it gives a very difficult picture to the employer to also start thinking of new ways of introducing and bringing on board different young people, youth, who are thinking of opportunities. But there are opportunities. And I think really what it is about looking at first things first. First things first, everybody has spoken about is the protocols. Bringing back trust to the traveler, bringing back assurances to anyone who is going to be a client in a hotel or in a restaurant or in a casino or in any aspect of the tourism value chain, that it is safe. That in itself will ensure and assure all of us who are in the industry of increasing our opportunities and increasing our occupation, or bums in beds and bums in seats, as we sometimes refer to them. And I'm talking domestically, initially, later on regionally, eventually internationally. But if we can become a self-compliant industry, able to self-regulate without government hovering over us, we really will get to a point where guests and travelers trust us and use us and see us as being those. So already those are the things that we work on. We have an ability to recover. South Africans will be the first to travel. We see a lot of the international countries like France encouraging domestic travel. And so we want that to be encouraged. And by so doing, I think right there we will begin to see a requirement of staff and a requirement of the employer being able to now contemplate the opportunities that Tracy was talking about of integrated work opportunities. Currently, it seems desperate, but there will be, as I say, that silver lining behind the clouds. Regionally, I would want us all, as we prepare, to think of the new markets. Cesar and I enjoy these conversations of what we can expect from the African market. We've never really, as South Africa, paid attention to that. We've always taken, I think, our African brothers and sisters for granted in looking at them as potential clients. Regional tourism will become a very important aspect. And I'm so glad that someone at the helm of South African tourism like Cesar sees that and talks about it with great ease, because that will open opportunities in terms of growing beyond our domestic tourism. Of course, once again, yeah. So
I'm just worried that we've got 5 minutes, yeah.
Okay, what I should say, and I'll jump it to the end. Basically what it is, I would want to encourage young people to think about the technological opportunities. They were touched on by Cesar. Obviously, we want to always have a balance between people and automation. I want young people to think, as they look at their future, about flexible staffing solutions. Whoever said you can't have 2 jobs? Who made that rule that people can only have 1 job? We were students and we had 3 jobs when we were still your age. The opportunity of apps and devices, which young people understand far much better than our generation does. This is the generation of digital natives and generation of millennials to take over. Stay informed, read extensively, attend webinars, use these opportunities while we all wait for that opportunity of that vaccine to make us a far much more freer society, but use these opportunities to identify new opportunities. And Tracy touched on it, identify a role model and a mentor so that as you prepare for your comeback into the industry and your participation, your meaningful participation, you have some people who have walked the road ahead of you to guide you and to lead you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sister Lindy. Always inspirational. Colleagues, we are way behind time. We had an hour set aside for this session. Now, I'm not sure if at 3 o'clock it bombs out, but I think couple of themes that I imagine from our panelists, and I just want to say to the panelists, thank you very, very much for very insightful inputs into this discussion. And I'm hoping that those who are watching the webinar are really getting enthused. I've also been looking at some of the questions that are coming through, and I'm really kind of amazed at how they are picking on a particular line of thinking and theme. And Prof, before we kind of go far, there's one or two points that I would like to put to you and maybe to Tracy around, there's a talk about indispensable workers are suddenly becoming dispensable again. And how do we kind of work against that sort of thinking? Because I think that really puts people at the back burner at the moment, which is not what we actually want to do. And I'd also kind of like to pose a thought to Cesar and to Anita around how do we get new ideas and how do we get entrepreneurship thinking into the tourism space as a new way of thinking. I think Sister Lindy touches on technology piece and touches on flexible staffing. So which means people will have to come up with new ideas. So can I perhaps start with Prof? And then I'll go to Tracy, Cesar, then Anita.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair, for that. I mean, I think this notion of disposability is a real challenge, and I'm not perhaps quite as pessimistic as some about the total automation of the industry. I think, yes, that might happen in some of the larger businesses, but South Africa, in common with most other countries in the world, it has a tourism industry which consists of a lot of very small businesses as well. And I think they're unlikely to lose the personal touch, which gives them their distinctiveness. I think we need to find different ways of delivering that personal touch. That's fine, even if it is through perspex. And I think it's really a case of perhaps creating opportunities in new sectors of the industry rather than only the large chains for our graduates and enabling them to get involved, maybe in a more of an entrepreneurial role rather than just a pure operational one. But I think, I come back to what I said earlier about the need to for employers to recognize that they are building a long-term relationship. It's not, the industry has to move away from what I call a speed dating relationship to one of permanence, even if that comes at some cost, because the cost does generate benefit in the longer term. And I think we need collectively to share that message with our industry partners in order to perhaps create this greater sense of permanence.
Tracy, do you want to just add on to that?
Yeah, I share Prof. Bond's views that I don't believe that the entire industry will be automated. I think there are many parts of it that can't be. And I think that part of what's really helpful in terms of this is us producing graduates that are skilled or competent in a wide range of fields. I think going forward, this work integrated learning concept is not something we will keep to the third year, the last 6 months. We will start engaging industry with students from their first year of study, helping them to be involved in industry-based projects, having guest lectures come in, and that then builds also a long-standing relationship between these potential employees and our students.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I look, the truth of the matter is we don't know what we don't know, and we're discovering it as we go along. So what this pandemic has done, it's a great leveler, right? So therefore, as I said earlier on, we need disruption in the sector. And it's not going to come from those that are inside, in my view. It's going to come from those outside looking in. And I like to think back around great companies such as Airbnb, very simply put together, and how it came through just from observation, right? So I don't think you're going to need permission. You just need to really kind of see the opportunity and really cut your way through it, essentially. Look at how we are also pivoting a bit. So previously, we started to realize we spend a lot of money on marketing, fancy posters and everything else. But nothing's more powerful than word of mouth at the moment. So therefore, we're starting to look at user-generated content, right? How do I get all of you to start putting stuff together that you post out there that someone else looks at and believes as opposed to what I say? And I think, again, we're evolving. And all I want to do is to invite you to come in. And as Sis Lindy had said, you've got to hustle your way through it. There is no application form to fill in at SA Tourism. It's going to give you, say, can I be a disruptor? Can I innovate? You just have to find your way through it. Thank you, Chair.
Great.
Anita, any comment?
I'm going to build on that, what everyone has said. And I think what Sisa said is really critical. There is no going back to the past of tourism. There's no old model. The change has been in demand. Protocols have changed our industry, desires have changed our industry, and appreciation of our industry has changed. So even if we went back and pulled up ultimately for students and graduates a curriculum that met the old model, it would not be relevant anymore. That's really critical. The next 1,000 days is going to be slowly rebuilding back the numbers of pre-COVID-19, but it's never going to be the same model. What's critical about what you've been saying, Jerry, is the fact that the students and graduates are not a focus in terms of building them into our industry. They are our industry going into the future. And they actually have a competitive advantage right now, because those that have been ultimately let go from the industry are from the old model. Whereas you've got younger people now who are in abundance, much more cost effective and unprejudiced of the old way of doing things, are going to shape the future. A quick one, a labor of love of mine over the last 100 days has been this program RISE, created with EHL in Lausanne, which is bringing 50,000 international students and graduates together to figure out the future. And even the people from the employment sector we've had in have said, the graduates are in a much stronger place for competition, as are the students, than those who have lost their jobs. So if we think we are shaping the future of our industry, it's not. It's not about the old model. We have to respond to the new model and the new generation of leadership, which are the people who are in the academic institutions.
Thank you, Anita. Before I wrap up, I'm going to ask Sis Lindy, because there's a lot of stuff we're talking about. I mean, if you look at the Q&A of entrepreneurship, SMMEs, small businesses coming into the sector, maybe you may want to just tell us some of the thinking and the work that you're doing through the Charter Council, and how that is aiming to support SMMEs. I think it's important that students and those who are coming into the space understand it. And by the way, I have been reprimanded for equating students with youth. I'm told that there's long life learning, and I noted that. So good lesson for me. Thank you for that. Yeah.
What are students called now?
No, it's no. I was saying students are young, but I think somebody says that no, they are not, because there is also lifelong learning.
Yes. So I mean, for the value and the benefit of the learners who are online, we have what is called the Tourism Transformation Council of South Africa. It's a legislated body that was introduced through an act, the Tourism Transformation Act. But what we really focus on is looking at the 5 levels that are important to drive business and to make sure that previously disadvantaged individuals who wouldn't have been in the mainstream of tourism and hospitality are included. We look at ownership. We look at management control, we look at skills development, which is where a lot of the learners fall in place. And I think the Prof talked about it. I liked his ideas of making employers really think about how they can invest in actual learners and in staff and employees for the future. But in skills development, it's really getting employers to come up with programs of learnerships and integrated work-related experiences. We also look at enterprise and supplier development. I think that is a very important aspect that the young people who are listening should think about, or the learners who are looking and listening in. where do you fit in terms of the creation of new businesses, of participating as small, medium enterprises of the future? The old-fashioned notion is that you must go to school, you must get a job, you must get an experience, and then you can start your business. The example of Airbnb and the examples of Uber are not necessarily individuals who walked miles and miles in the work environment. These are individuals who were exposed and understood the role of disruptors. And so I would love to see curriculum that really begins to focus, place a bigger focus and supports the work that we are doing in trying to encourage previously disadvantaged individuals into the mainstream of enterprise and supplier development, of getting young people to really start thinking at an early stage of what you need to do to start a business, how to run a business, and how to get involved in that sooner than later. Jerry, there's so much more I could talk about in terms of transformation. We need to make sure that transformation stays center field. It also has been greatly affected by COVID in that many businesses were very quick to shirk and to throw aside the requirements of what the codes and the codes of conduct stipulate. But it is our responsibility jointly in collaboration with all partners, learning places, employers, and all the different associations that exist to bring back, to put transformation center field. If we could create jobs simply just by creating new businesses, we would again be contributing to bringing ourselves back to where we should be in the next, what did you call it, 1,000 days, Anita?
Thanks, Ms. Lindy. I think as I conclude, I mean, there's a couple of people on the Q&A who have asked questions around entrepreneurship, value chain. And I don't want to be flippant about it, but I think sometimes we overthink some of these things. So that in the new era of tourism, people are looking for experiences. And experiences come in different shapes, forms, and sizes. And the beauty of experiences is that they can be anywhere. You don't need infrastructure, you don't need big investments. And I'm now thinking about people who, for instance, somebody who's got skills as a DJ, and since Lindy speaks about flexible staffing, that during the day you work at a restaurant, at 8 o'clock you go and do your DJ work, then the next moment you're doing something at UJ as a temporary lecturer, or whatever the story is. I think we just want to encourage people in this sector to start thinking around it. One thing in South Africa that we haven't done very well is we have such rich culture and heritage. And young people, and also old people, Enva, who come from areas, for instance, in rural areas, who have a depth of knowledge and understanding of culture. How do you take that culture and actually give people who are coming in as inbound tourists from outside the world to start engaging with it? I mean, I've been speaking to some of the colleagues at SAT and CISA, and a lot of them shared stories of some of the best experiences that they've had of inbound buyers coming in from overseas have been the ones where they've taken them to the villages, to the townships, to the back of the side of the road experiences. And these experiences are what we refer to as disruptors. And they don't have to be the things that have been done before. So don't look for something that's been done, but find something new, bring it to the table, and therein lies the big opportunities. I think that's and we then speak about the entrepreneurship, and I think someone like the Charter Council is beginning to create that infrastructure and system that will allow for that to happen. I think when you start working with higher education, and then the content and the curriculum and everything else sits on the higher education, and you've got to find a way through things like the Charter Council, as well as some forward-thinking companies and organizations, to then bring in people who have skills, who are sitting in those areas, whether it's skills to dance, to DJ, or to create artifacts. Those need to start coming to the fold as part of the experience economy that we create. I'm not sure if any of my panelists want to say anything in closing that we may have left out. I'm going to start with Tracy, who's on the left, and then go to Prof, and then Cesar, Anita, and Sis Lindy. Tracy?
Thank you to everybody who has joined today, and also for, you know, so many industry members who during this really difficult time have acknowledged and recognized the importance of supporting our students. As Anita mentioned, they are the future of the industry. So we really do need to support them, and thank you to those who have. And I really hope that going forward, we will get the chance to work with many more of you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you again for the opportunity to join you this afternoon. It's been a real privilege, and I just hope that the South African industry and the education providers can work together to work through this these issues. It's a phenomenal product you have, fantastic service, and such varied service across the country that it certainly deserves to succeed. There are industries around the world where I wouldn't say that at all, but I do have faith in your capacity to work this through collectively. So the best of luck with that.
Thank you. Just in closing, there is so much opportunity. We have less than 1% of the global market share in tourism. And so there's plenty of headroom. We have barely scratched the surface across our 9 provinces as to what can be done. So I really want to invite people in, come in, showcase all the small dorpies, villages. People are looking for intimacy, and it's how you all put it together. So that's the big gap for me. So yeah, I wish you all the best. Thank you.
And exactly as what Cisa is saying, importantly, we have such opportunity in South Africa. My blood is still green. Importantly, with COVID-19, the value of travel and tourism has changed, but importantly, the values of travel and tourism has changed. We will need technology, but we need touch. We're an emotional industry. And ultimately, as we get through this, good can and must come from this. Mother Nature might have a bad temper, but God will make sure good comes of this. So everyone stay home, stay safe, keep your hands clean, and stay hopeful.
I'd want to say it's a time to dream. It's a time to imagine the unimaginable. And, you know, I'm in my 50s. So when I dream, I don't think my dreams are even half as powerful as some of the young people who are living or listening in. But how about a tour from my living room in Sweden of Soweto with someone walking in Kliptown and showing me what Kliptown and Regina Mundi looks like now as we sit under lockdown, and you get paid virtually? How about that? How about a front desk clerk who has medical and hygiene as part of her curriculum? So she has a nursing ability, an ability to help us, because COVID is going to be around for a long time. And we need to start thinking and anticipating some of those different requirements and skills. So dream, think of things that were never imaginable, and there can't be anything that is wrong at this time. It's time for disruption. Thank you.
Sister Lindy and the panelists, thank you very, very, very much. To the colleagues who've signed in, I just want to say we haven't answered all your questions, but we'll try and answer as much of them through the Q&A online as well. So just to say thank you, and this is one of many. I think it begins to look like we do need to focus on things like entrepreneurship, and we do need to look at things like technology in the new era that we're going to be living in, and how it impacts on all of us. We do need to talk a little bit about disruptors. What kind of disruptions is sustainable and makes sense? I think those conversations will emerge as we go. So, but we are picking up, I think, where the pulse is going. And we hope that we can have further conversations. And to the panelists, once again, thank you very much. And to the School of Tourism and Hospitality, to Dr. D, to Kagiso, and the rest of the team, the technical team, thank you very much, guys, for having hosted us this afternoon. I think for me, it's an absolute honor to have facilitated this session, both as a moderator as well as the privilege of being the chair of the School of Tourism. It's a badge that I wear very proudly when I walk the streets of Johannesburg. So keep up the good work. And lovely, we'll see you sometime soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Cheers. Lovely seeing all of you. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Everyone, stay safe.
For the opportunity.
I know.